By now we all know what this is. This is Heritage by Opeth, of course. 3 years ago, that album turned a lot of Opeth fans and really a lot of metal fans on their heads. Really worked to divide them a little bit, or at least got them talking. Never before had it really seemed that a band was able to transition over into another style of music, and one that actually has been relatively close to their core sound, just not something that was always the forefront, and it really go completely and totally well. It's never something that people are always consistently, sold on from the onset. However, Heritage was a damn good release. It's one that was kind of a grower, and you really have to be a fan of old school prog in order to really understand it. I understand that's not for everybody. Some people just need those growls, or shit just doesn't work. Pale Communion is the second observation of this era of Opeth. It's an observation that was slated to be released in June, and then was pushed back to August, which is where we are right now. But it leaked in July, so we've got this weird, strange parallel. In July, I swore that I would not review this album until either the band contacted me themselves and told me it was okay, or they decided to stream it. They decided to do the latter of the two, so unfortunately no mailbox, letter from Mike. Maybe next time. So let's talk about Pale Communion. Let's talk about the 55-minute long new opus from Opeth, which, if you just combine those together, you get Opuseth, which is really strange. But that's not hardly the point. We all know about some of these tracks. In fact, most of you who are viewing this video have probably listened to the full album already, because it's leaked and it's been on YouTube for a month, you fucking cheaters. But hey, I'm not going to hold that against you. I've heard that there's been a lot of things that have actually caused this to happen, and none of them really reflect very well on Roadrunner Records, but I'm not going to say anything because, yeah. 8 tracks. 8 tracks. And this is something that really, once again, takes into account and really holds true to that old school 1970s prog sound that Heritage really hinted at. However, this is an album in Pale Communion that feels like it has a little bit more focus, and maybe the reason why it feels this way, or maybe the reason why it will feel this way to a lot of people, is because there has been 3 years worth of time in order for individuals, for fans, to get used to this new sound. And now it's sunk into a lot of others that they're not going back. They don't want to go back. Especially not Mike. Mike is loving the shit out of this. One of the very first songs that he wrote for this album, Goblin, which is an instrumental which is right in the middle of this release, was based off of a band of the same name. Something that he felt whenever he wrote it was sounding very much resemblant to the band. And it's definitely a cool number. It's quirky. Really, this whole album can be described as a little bit quirky, as most prog albums from the 1970s were. You have to understand, and this is going to be a bit of an education for a lot of individuals, but prog albums from the 1970s were not necessarily all about mind-bending musicianship. Now, this is something that certainly had a keynote aspect. This is certainly something that was at the forefront. However, you didn't need to have Dream Theater-like guitar solos. You didn't have to mind-bend at certain, speeds in order to really reflect some sort of impression. This was instead one that was more so within the art form itself, and the construction, and just overall musical exploration, taking things to a horizon and a level that may seem a little bit curious and strange. What we now know as avant-garde metal today, which really just goes to fuck weird places, well, we're not quite there. In fact, no. Think of old bands such as Camel, and you'll kind of get a little bit of an idea. Intermix it in with, bands such as Goblin, and, even some of the earliest Yes work, and you can kind of understand where we're coming from. Whenever Cusp of Eternity, which is really a very hard-knocked rocker, came out, man, oh man, it was easy to be blown away by this, because it was a hard-edged song. It was one that almost sounded like at any moment in time Mike could launch right back into that death metal growl, that sinister sneer that he became so known for throughout Opeth's harder material. But it didn't happen. Really, whenever you first heard Eternal Rains Will Come, you realized just how much fun that you could actually have, and how sinister and kind of, just just really heavy that this band can sound without even having that same heaviness that they possessed on such great classic albums such as Blackwater Park or, My Arms Your Hearse or even Deliverance. And this is something that definitely felt like it had a lot more character to it than perhaps some of the tracks on Watershed. But then you get into the epic, Moon Above, Sun Below, which seems as though it should be reversed. But that's the point. Throughout 10 minutes, this is a track that undulates between really having a lot of snide character to it to just some beautiful musicianship. This is one that really acts as a center point or a centerpiece to this album without being directly in the center. It's a perplexity all itself, or all its own, should I say. This is a great track that really illuminates side one with just beautiful, beautiful moments. Not to mention with its precision. This is one that feels like it's exactly where it needs to be. Some people may complain it's too long. I feel as though this is a track that easily could have continued. It almost felt as though the body of this snake was one that could have easily been longer, considering the coils of it were going in impressive directions and constantly kind of keep you guessing. That's what I love about this disc. I was constantly guessing. I was constantly guessing as I was moving through Elysian Woes, going into Goblin, and then going into River, which really just kind of stands out as a real awesome aspect of side number 2. This is a track that sort of takes you by surprise after the instrumental, and it was almost like, oh yeah, that's what Mike's voice sounds like. Damn, he's a fucking good singer. And you have that moment, and the whole entire track musically just surrounds it with beautiful echoes. As you get to the final 2 tracks, really the last 3 are able to span roughly about 22 minutes. 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and then 7.5. You start to recognize that Opeth with Heritage was really experimenting with something. They were toying around. They were testing the waters. This album feels tremendously focused. It feels tremendously cerebral. It feels as though not a note is out of place, and everything that was intended was actually able to make it to the final cut. And this is also an album that almost feels... it feels curious, at times. Almost as though Heritage... this could have been a great precursor to it. If this would have come out prior to Heritage, or instead of Heritage, I feel as though the transition would have been not as surprising. Mainly considering what we heard on an album such as Watershed, kind of how close we were to getting to the albums Heritage and Pale Communion. Almost as though Watershed was showcasing itself as really the turning point. Even though this was something that was preached and maybe heralded John the Baptist with Damnation many years prior. I love the aspect of this disc that kept me guessing. And I love the vintage idea that surrounds this album. I love the fact that I feel as though I've turned back the clock and gone back 40 years to the 1970s, a heyday of progressive rock music. And this feels right at home. It feels as though it belongs in the catalog of some of these great bands. And I love the fact that it's happening here in 2014. This is an age where prog should rule once again. 40 years later. Why not? I know what you're going to say. Coverkillernation. Next thing you're going to say is the disco should fucking come back. Well, what'd you think of that Daft Punk album last year? It's pretty fucking disco. I liked it. I liked it a lot. 89 out of 100 for Pale Communion. Loved that it kept me guessing. Loved that it kept me going. And loved, and continue to love, where this direction of Opeth's career is going. May not end up as the album of the year this year. In fact, based off of scores from albums this week, it's at number 2. But it's still a mighty fine effort. It's very solid. And it has so many beautiful moments, so many terrific harmonies, and great vocals from Mike. And so many great moments of musical bliss from the band that it's just hard to deny. All of you that cannot get into this side of Opeth, I apologize. I apologize that this is something that's just for a unique sect of Opeth fans or metal fans or music fans. I appreciate the fact that you love their previous work, and I'm sure they do too. This is what they're doing now. And I kind of really fucking like it.